look at my graceful strides. Sir, the Miniature Dork clowns are coming and they demand that we like and subscribe to their channel.
Head back to the mothership immediately. The Miniature Dork ones are coming and they're pissed off. Come on, man, hit the turbo. What are you waiting for? What are you waiting for? Hit the turbo. Come on, you give me that. Give me that. Something wrong with the engines. I guess I better go check it out.
Humans are going to suffer.
What was that? Huh. Thought I heard something. I guess not. Looking around here. Uh-oh. That's not good, is it? I think I better fix that.
Humans will pay. Your hatred for success stories has gone on long enough. You had your chance to join the dork side, and you chose to go the way of the wank instead. Now you will pay.
Jigs!
Welcome to Miniature Dork Universe, home of the success story. That's all we do, and today we're going to bring the excellence with these cork roads. I've used various kinds of cork for these. This one's an old placemat. You can see the pattern on the back. And I have some dollar store cork. This is adhesive cobblestone surface. It's a model railroad product, which is pretty excellent. But today we'll be focusing on dirt roads, in particular for the Mediterranean theater and 12mm scale. Depending on the colors you use though and the width of the roads, you can adapt these to any scale you want to do. So here we have some cork placemat, which is 2mm thick, and I'm going to be using that for the 12mm or 144 scale stuff. And then here is some cork from the dollar store that comes in sheets of 2. They're 1 foot by 1 foot, and it looks like they're $3 a pack, and they're about 5mm thick, so they're pretty good for doing 15mm or bigger. But the thin stuff works too. The thin stuff is a little bit more flexible, obviously, but all of this stuff is pretty cheap. I think you can buy the thin stuff if you don't have an IKEA around you, like mine were IKEA. I think the pack of 4 was $10 maybe, and they're probably 1 foot by 2 feet or something like that. To make the roads for my 12mm O group, I'm going to make them the same width as this bridge that will be part of the battlefield at some point. So come to a decision what width you want your road, and then, you know, in this case I'm going to measure it out specifically for this, but you can do it any width you want really. So I'll get a measurement for this and then I'll move on. I'm going to make a simple jig because what you want is all of the ends of your roads to butt up perfectly. So this jig will help to do that. I've determined that the road's going to be 47mm overall, and the actual width of the road's going to be 32. So to find the sort of size of the shoulder, you subtract it and then divide that number by 2. I ended up with 7.5, but I think I'll just go for 7. So I'm going to take 47mm or 4.7 centimeters and then measure in from the edge 7mm on each side. And then I'll use this jig for the end of every single road. I'm going to double check my jig against the bridge just to make sure that it's good, and it is. So now when I have my road sections, I can measure in the shoulder quickly with this jig. I don't have to get out the ruler for each one, and it's much faster that way. Tools you're going to need. You'll need a fairly decent pen for one. You're going to need a nice steel ruler, a long enough one that you can cut the strips without having to, move the ruler across as you're cutting. I have a square like this to square things up. It's always useful. I have a measuring tape for longer things. What else do we got here? Oh, use an Olfa knife. Do not use an X-Acto for this because it's going to take forever. So make sure you have lots of Olfa blades, and make sure that you always have really sharp Olfa blades, because if they're not sharp, they're going to actually tear away at the cork as you're trying to cut it. And that is going to elicit some bad words and maybe some self-medicating, which may not be conducive to success stories. And that's what we're going for here. Excellence and success stories. This is the Miniature Dork Universe pledge. So I've determined that these placemats are 422. So they're going to be 47 millimeters wide. I got 422 millimeters of strips, or of placemat. So I'll do the division and see how many that I can cut out. And you want to figure out how many pieces you're going to get, and make sure that you have enough to cover your battlefield. So this looks like I'll end up with 8. So that should work out. There is going to be a crossroads and a Y junction though, so you really want to make sure that you have enough that you can bring roadways all the way up to those, so you don't have gaps on your table. When I cut these, I mark each strip and then cut it, and then mark the next one and cut it. I don't put all of my marks and then do all of the cuts, because I want to keep the consistency really accurate. And I find if you mark them all at once and then just cut them, you're not going to have all the same width. And I'm not sure exactly why, but just trust me. I mean, when you're using a saw, it makes sense because the saw blade has a width, and each time you cut, you're cutting out that width of the saw blade. You don't really have that with a ruler, yet it still seems to happen that way. So it takes a little longer, I guess. It's not as like production line sort of oriented, but trust me, just do them one at a time, and you'll see that your strips are going to be the same width, and they're going to butt up together, because you really want to avoid having all of your road sections slightly different widths. It becomes very noticeable. So I've got a really sharp blade, and then just go along. Don't press too hard against the ruler. Come straight down, and you can see even with that, it's sort of ripped away at the cork. And I check it, just bend it over and see, it should be like exactly the same on each end. Once they're all cut out, then I butt them all up against each other and check out to make sure that all of them line up well. And if you need to make any amendments, you can. I went through and checked them all, and they all were a smashing success. So now we will move on to the next portion of our mission. You're going to want curved road pieces too, especially if you're doing a European type battlefield. If you live in North America, you might be used to towns and cities being very grid-like with straight streets. But the second you go to Europe, you'll notice that the streets are often not like that. So definitely have some curvatures in the road. So I start by cutting the main curvature, and then I'm going to go in with a ruler and just measure each one out, like several points at 47 millimeters, which was my measurement. And try to keep your ruler square to the edge. I'm not sure if I'm doing a really great job doing that, but if you keep it really perpendicular, or as perpendicular to the point you're measuring from as you can, then you'll get a fairly consistent 47 millimeters all the way across. Here I'm doing a smashingly bad job doing that, but take my word for it. I think I sorted my my show out later on down the road, and that'll keep even these curved pieces meeting up nicely on the ends. Now I'm getting with the program here. See how it's really perpendicular to the edge? So try to do that as you go along the curve. and that distance will stay nice and consistent. Get as many points on as you can. Doesn't need to be ridiculous, but have it enough so that you can join the dots in a fairly smooth way. And then you're going to want to make sure you've got a fresh Olfa blade, like break it off so you got a fresh one so that it's super sharp. And then you should just be able to zip along this line with a maximum amount of excellence. Take your time. Stay within your lines. If it gets a little wobbled out, it's not a big deal. And it's going to when you start to skive out the edges, so yeah, don't get too super particular here, or it's going to take you forever, and it's really not that necessary. So there it is. And as you can see, it matches up pretty nicely. What I'm noticing though is my edges don't look very square. Again, try to get that line nice and perpendicular. Otherwise, when you join it up with the road section after it, it's going to look kind of dumb. So in the spirit of getting rid of things that are dumb, we're going to cut that dumb corner off and make that nice and perpendicular to that point. And away it goes. And when you're using a really sharp blade, it's less likely to tear a chunk of the cork out. Because if you keep tearing out chunks of cork, then you're going to say some bad words. And as you can see, it joins up very nice. Now all my strips are cut and we're ready to move on to the next step. There's a wank on a motorcycle outside. Maybe you can hear that, sorry. So as you can see, they all turned out pretty well. And I also did a crossroads and a Y intersection. When you're doing crossroads, make sure that you round off the edges here, because I've done some in the past and just left them totally square. But even paved crossroads aren't like that. You know, they usually round it out so that you have a bit of a turn radius. And yeah, I've done a bunch where I just made them X's and it looks kind of stupid. So yeah, again, let's aim for the excellence and leave the dumb stuff out. And as you can see, the curved sections end up fitting really nicely. So I think we can move on to the next step, which is to measure in where the road is going to be in the middle of this. Now we'll get out our Super-jig. Remember that? Here it is back again. So when I'm drawing in the shoulders, I'm going to be very, very careful at the very ends. And then as I'm going down, I'm going to make several marks as I go across the road section. I'm not going to be as particular in the middle because I almost don't really care. It can be a little bit off. In fact, it should be a little bit off. It's going to look a little bit more realistic for a dirt road anyway. Well, no, even for a paved road. If you look at paved roads or, you know, even a cobblestone or something, they're not perfect. I'd say probably cobblestones are the most perfect, but definitely paved roads and dirt roads, they can be a little bit screwy on the edges. We're just going to make sure that the very ends are perfect so that they butt up nicely to the guy next to them. So go along and get all of those out. Once all of your points have been put in, you can sort of check the width of your road. Here's a 1/144 scale Jeep, a 3D print. It's going to be one of my combat patrols, but it looks to be a decent width. Now we're going to skive our shoulders down to the road edge. So this part is a little bit greasy, but you can sort of thwart any kind of treachery by having a really sharp Olfa blade. But you kind of want to avoid pulling off at the end there too hard, or else it might just rip a section of the cork out of the end. And I did end up ripping the ends from time to time. It's kind of easy to do. And if you do, just cut it again. Just cut that section right out. So unless you really need your road sections to be exactly the same size, you can just trim them down when it's done if you have any of those edges. Also, as you're cutting, the blade gets dull. So sometimes you just get to the end and the blade is just dull enough that it doesn't slice through with surgical precision, and then it just takes a chunk out of the corner, and just slice that out and you'll restore your excellence. So that's how that goes. I try to get it down to 0 at the outer edge, and if it's not a big deal. This cork is this weird laminated stuff, so it looks a little bit funky, but I think I'm going to just slice off some of that funky stuff like I just mentioned. Do your curved road sections in exactly the same fashion. Just take your time and you will succeed. And be careful not to chop your thumb off. You kind of shouldn't be cutting right in towards your fingers like that, but that's the way you have the most control. So I just recommend being careful. Now that our roads are cut out, we're going to start adding the texture. So I'm going to use a cookie sheet to catch all of my sand. So here's some beach sand that I use. And I'm going to mix it with some model railroad ballast. There's a couple different colors here. The colors end up kind of showing through too, because I don't do a super heavy paint coat. And we're going to put that on with some good old friendly Mod Podge, the matte stuff. And you can see my creepy reflection in the cookie tin. So for this, it's just straight up Mod Podge. I'm going to jam that on, and I'm just doing the shoulders. If you see up here, I'm going to put up a picture here of a street in Italy. You see the edges are covered with sort of gravelly, rough stuff. And then the middle is a finer, hard packed down sort of surface. And that's what I'm going to go for here. I didn't want to have to put a bunch of like tire and track marks into the road because I'm trying to do this reasonably quickly. And so that kind of thing, you have to start using different putties and making, wheels that you can press into the road and things like that. I didn't want to take the time to do it, even though it looks great. I wanted to move through this quickly. So I went for that hard packed, very arid looking sort of road surface. And now I have a little scoop. This one was from a jewelry tool store. It's for scooping up gemstones. So I don't know where you would get little scoops like that, but I really recommend a scoop like this for doing any terrain. You can put turf and stones and sand in it, and it gives you a lot of control, which, I don't know, I just like having lots of control. Does that make me a control freak? Maybe, but I don't really care. I like it. So I'm going to go and do this for every piece of road section and then let it dry. To seal in the edges of the roads, I'm going to use this golden soft gel, which is like an acrylic gel medium. It's very tough. If you've seen some of my other videos, you've seen me use it, but I use that in place of the Mod Podge to do like a sealing coat, just because it does have a bit of a stronger bond. And there's my cat, Tony, trying to drink the Mod Podge water. Don't drink that, kitty. Otherwise, you're going to start acting weird like me. And we've got his tail in the way. So what I will do is get some isopropyl alcohol, the heavy stuff. Then I'll scoop my soft gel into one of these like medicine cup container things. You can buy packs of those pretty cheap. And then I'll spray in a bunch of the alcohol. Mix in the water. And then give that a jolly good mix. And you want it to come out having a consistency kind of like homogenized milk or something. Not too thin, not too thick. It takes a while to mix it up. The alcohol helps break it down faster, so I recommend. When I say heavy alcohol, I mean like the 99% stuff. Once that's mixed, we're going to get some of our fun-loving flow improver somewhere. Here we go. Liquitex is the stuff I use. So it's 1 drop of this to 20 parts water. So I don't really figure that out. I just put a jolly small dose in and a rather large bit of water, and that's enough. And have it in a spray bottle, spray it over everything, and then when you drop that on, you'll see that it spreads out nicely into all of the little gravelly bits. Eyedroppers like this are good to have for stuff like this. Again, I recommend that stuff.
What
And
a dick.
there's more creepiness. That's a highly relevant and necessary part of this video. Once that stuff is dry, it is very tough. That's what we want. I want the surface of the road to be finer, so I'm going to use baking soda and I'm going to use beach sand and leave out the model railroad ballast stuff. And for this, I'm jolly well going to use Mod Podge again and paint it on with this crappy brush and get a fairly uniform coat. Do your brush strokes the way I'm doing it so that it's going to look like the vehicle traffic on the road is sort of pulling the sand and gravel in a certain way, even though it is really hard packed down. And here I'm sprinkling on the baking soda, just random. And then I'll start in with a bit of the beach sand. And I'm doing it sections at a time so the glue doesn't dry up too quickly on me. I want most of this stuff to stick. And I'm going to go through and do this with all of my road sections. Before the glue has gotten fully dried, I'm going to take another brush like this crappy one here and drag the baking soda and sort of streak it down the roadway. Again, just to give it that look that vehicle traffic is kind of pulling it in a certain direction. We don't want too blobby bits. And so once the glue dries a little bit, you're able to do that and do it very sort of directionally the way you want it. And it ends up being just the right amount of texture. If I was doing this for 15 millimeter scale or 20 millimeter, I'd just leave the baking soda out and just use some beach sand. Or, you know, whatever you can come up with. You might have other stuff too, like maybe tile grout or something would be perfect. And once that's dry, we're going to repeat the step we did on the shoulders. I'm going to hit it with the Super Flow Improver, and then we'll get our Turbo Wicked acrylic gel medium mixed down with water and an eyedropper. And we'll seal that shit in just like that. So give it a few moments to spread out. The flow improver will actually have a bit of capillary action that'll pull that stuff in, so you don't really have to soak it, although you do want it to eventually cover everything. So you can also add more of the flow improver, and that's going to start to pull it a bit. And just give it a few seconds, and I'm adding a few more drops. And that should be enough. It looks like it's going to pull across the entire surface. And once again, we'll do one more just for fun and games. And then we get the eyedropper. Come on, get the eyedropper there, Billy. There. And just hit that. Oop, there's a freaking bit of, there's a acrylic gel booger in it. So we'll just pick that out. Screw you. And we'll let that do its thing. Hit it with a bit more of the flow improver. And also let it run down the edge just by tipping it. And it'll start to soak through to everything. and it will be a success story. So I'm going to move through all of these and just do them the same way. To put my base coat down, I got a liter of really good quality primer, and I nearly choked when I saw the price of it now. The last time I bought one, which was around 2019, which I'm still using by the way, it was 11 bucks. This one was 26 bucks. The inflation sucks. That rhymes with bucks. I use good quality latex primer because it has a very tough sort of elastic finish, which is actually going to help keep these from breaking apart, especially if you're going to use them a lot. I do the back and the front, and that'll prevent any warping. Once the backs are done and allowed to dry, I move over to the top side and give it a fairly good coat. Another reason why I use the more expensive primer is because it goes on in one coat. I don't want to have to come back and keep coating this stuff up. So yeah, it just has a more durable finish, which is nice to protect the actual piece. Goes on in one coat, and it used to be relatively cheap. Like I said, I bought a pail of a darker color to do, more temperate or more northern climates, like a darker brown. And I still have that can, and I think there's still more than 3/4 left, and I've done a lot of projects with it. So it's a good idea. If I use the craft paints that I usually use for terrain, I'd go through a whole bottle doing these, and this barely, I barely reduce the can at all doing this full project of roads. So even though it's expensive, it's still less expensive than buying multiple bottles of paint. And you can also put it on with a bigger brush. The other thing I found about it too, and I don't know if it's because it's expensive or it's just that's the way primer is, but it maintained all the detail. Like even though the paint seems quite thick, all of the detail stayed. So that is also a good thing. Then I painted the shoulders with this folk art honeycomb color. This is the color I use on all my Mediterranean bases. So I want the shoulders to be a bit darker. This stuff is still a bit wet, but I don't care. If it blends in a bit, that's great. And I've watered this paint down quite a bit for the shoulders. Like I'm just trying to darken it up a little bit. I'm not really caring too much. If it's exactly like my figure bases, for example, I'm just going to quite haphazardly throw a coat of this on all of the shoulders, just so that they have a bit more contrast to the road. And now we'll kick in with the first coat of dry brushing. So for that, I'm going to use Deco Art Desert Sand, and I'm going to get a fairly large brush like this one that's nice and soft. It's still a pretty cheapie. It's not like a really expensive brush. I think I did get it at an art store, but it's not like one of their premium brushes. But it's a fairly decent brush, and that should do the trick. Just make sure it's dry. And you don't want to use something like this on the surface because it's going to be very patchy looking. So use a nice wide brush for this. Get a rag ready to go. When I dry brush terrain too, I don't take as much paint off of the brush as I do when I'm doing it on a vehicle. You don't need to. If you take off too much paint, in fact, it's going to be a bit of a pain in the ass. Charge up the brush, give it a couple swipes on the rag, and then the first strokes I do very lightly and keep them going quite long, and that way it's not going to look kind of like a patchy, crappy look. And I go quite light until, a lot of the paint comes off the brush, and then I'll start to press a bit harder. And you're kind of getting a sort of frosted look. It can be kind of overbearing, but I find with terrain, once you start putting the groundwork on it, it takes out that. You don't even notice it anymore, really. You just see highlights, but it doesn't have that token frosty dry brush look. And if it does on the road, it's kind of okay with me because the detail is not as rough as on the shoulders. So again, it just has a slightly different look. I want the road to look very dusty and very hard packed. So that's about what you want right there. And then we're going to move on to this Natural Buff by Craft Smart. I don't think it matters what colors you actually use as long as they're sort of in the same range. And you can find these craft paints at stores like Michael's or dollar stores. It's very cheap, so just get what looks good to you. This Natural Buff actually has a bit of a pinkish tinge to it, but I think it works out pretty nice. I like adding like a little subtle different tone to things. And again, I'm going to go very soft with very long strokes on the road initially to make it look like dust that's been sort of influenced up and down the streets by traffic. Sort of go around those corners a bit. Imagine tires sort of digging in and pulling the dust in that sort of shape. And then I'm going to go along on the rough stuff with it. Moving around the crossroads, and I'll keep on with every single piece of road section. And for the final dry brush masterpiece, we're going to get straight up white, and I'm just going to do this on the gravelly stony bits on the outside. Just like in the picture there, the rocks are very light colored, so we're going to achieve this with white. What are we going to do, voice in my head?
I know, Davies. We're just going to paint the stones in white, and we're gonna leave everything else just the way it was, aren't we, Davies?
That's right, voice in my head. Just the stuff on the shoulders. Everything else stays the same. So what do you think, voice in my head? Do the Miniature Dork lawns like excellence and success stories?
Gee, Davies, I guess they do. It seems that 98% of them like it, and then the other 2%, they don't like it so much. But you know what the other 2% can do, don't you, Davies?
All right, voice in my head, let's not get carried away. Let's just do some white dry brushing and bring the excellence. Now that that's all done, I'm going to do a light shade coat, well, a dark shade coat actually, but I'm going to water it down. So I'll do a watery shade coat just on the edges between the dirt road surface and the shoulders, just to sort of make it more well defined. So this color is German Camouflage Medium Brown. I'll start with a glop of that and drop in some of the Flow Improver directly into the paint, and then I'll get this is a long, well, I'll mix it up with this crappy brush. I usually mix my paints thoroughly with a crappy brush first, and then I'll get a semi-crappy brush. This is a long bristle sort of brush, and I'm just going to go along here like so and just add a bit of shadow into the edges of the road. And a lot of this is going to sort of disappear as we go. And some of it might bleed out a bit, but it looks like dried up mud puddle. Like here, I'll show you. Like you can see the darker areas of the road where it's gotten wet. And so yeah, if it bleeds out, it's just going to look kind of like either it rained soon or someone poured some water out or something on the side of the road. Either way, it's not going to look bad, so I wouldn't get too worried about it. So I will go and do all of the edges of all of the road sections like this. And I'm also, if there's any areas where I want to sort of bring out the stones, I'm going to go through and just touch it with this a little bit. Just little bits here and there, but try not to go too crazy. So when I was finished with that, if I found any areas that were a bit too contrasty, I just went in with another fairly wide brush and dry brushed in some of this antique white just to tone it down a bit. But I didn't have to do that very often. To start putting on the flocking, I'm going to, okay, there's that wank again. Come on, Davies. I know we're enticed by shiny things, but let's, okay, so here. I have this box of flocking, and it's a mixture of medium and light green, and I just put it all in the same box and shake the shit out of it. And then I have some of this sort of fine sort of turf, not the coarse stuff, or maybe this is the coarse stuff, I don't know. But I've mixed a bunch of colors together. There's like a dead, dry sort of tan color, and then 2 colors of green. And for this I'm going to use Mod Podge and Flow Improver to stick this stuff down. I'm not going to use the acrylic gel because the odd time it does get a bit cloudy. So to keep the colors nice and bright for the green stuff, I don't really care so much with rocks and things, but with the green stuff, I'm going to use the Mod Podge. This is just something I've learned along the way. Normally the acrylic gel is my hero, but there's certain things where I'm going to use this. And you can mix the Mod Podge with the acrylic flow improver and it has the exact same effect. It makes it have better capillary action. The flow improver, I think, deals more with the water than with the acrylic in paint. It's the surface tension of the water, and there's maybe a kind of detergent or something in it that just takes the elasticity out of the water tension and makes it more runny, like as if it were oil. Not exactly like oil, so don't get too chuffed about it, but not too bad. So for this, I'm going to do it a little bit thicker than what I would do my ceiling coat, just because I'm going to use this to stick down the actual turf. But I want it thin enough that it's going to run around and still have a bit of capillary action, because I want the stones to kind of stick out. I don't want to stick all the turf on top of all of my textures. And this works really well to that end. You'll see as we go. You have to mix this quite thoroughly. Make sure there's no chunks of glue booger. And then we'll take that out of the way because that's not that interesting. You go over there, and then we'll get one of these things and put it over there. Come on, Davies. There you go. And we'll get the shit out. And I'm going to get my super wicked jeweler scoop again and use that to sprinkle this stuff on. And, okay, Davies, this video's getting kind of boring, dude. Do something. There's the scoop. And I'm going to start by putting a slight amount in and around some of the dark stuff. And you start getting some nice layers when you mix the colors together, like the dirt colors and the grass colors. It ends up being kind of nice. It looks nice around the sort of stain that was left from the wash that I put on. And then I'm going to just randomly spot the glue here and there, like so. The key with terrain is random. You want to keep stuff looking not too uniform. When it does, it'll always look kind of weird. So try to go to as random as you possibly can. And so that's how that looks. I'm going to go around and do every single piece of the road sections in the same way. When I got all the sections done, I'm looking at it and finding any areas where, you know, it looks kind of bare or I want to fill in. And for that, I'm using just the straight up lighter green sort of flock and just carefully tapping that on, nice and controlled. And that way, you're going to also get more depth in the color. Now for the final bit of ground turf stuff, we're going to use this coarser turf and glue it down. So if you notice any areas in your previous fine turf that have a bit of an excellence deficit, you can fix that up by putting on some of the coarse turf. And so we're just going to go around and randomly put this stuff on. And again, go random. Random is the name of the game here. Don't have anything too uniform. And if you see any spots you don't like, just fill them in with the coarse turf. And for this, I'm going to use straight up Mod Podge. And again, I'm using the Mod Podge here because sometimes the acrylic gel gets a bit cloudy. The acrylic gel is a bit tougher, but this Mod Podge should be plenty tough. And I'm going to leave this at the coarse turf in terms of putting, groundwork on it. I've put static grass. I think if you remember the ones I showed at the beginning, I put static grass on them, but the static grass makes them challenging to store without, squashing all the groundwork and the turf and stuff. So, and because this is 12 mil, I'm going to leave out things like grass tufts and static grass and just have this crusty, to me, the fine turf looks almost like kind of clovery stuff growing around, and then, the coarser turf looks like little weedy type plants. And I've mixed the color so it has a bit of depth, and then there's the tan stuff that looks sort of dried and dead. I think it kind of works for a Mediterranean look. And when it was all done, I was pretty happy with the green stuff that I put on. I didn't feel like, it was missing something without having static grass. I mean, the static grass does look nice for sure. I'm not going to say that it doesn't, but you want to sort of balance functionality with, with the aesthetic of it too. If it looks fine without it, then I would leave it out for something like this that you're going to have to store. And, ideally stack it up. Otherwise you're going to have some kind of giant, you're going to have to spread this stuff out pretty far. So all things to keep in mind. So I'm going to go around with all of these and put on the coarse turf, and then I'll seal it in the exact same way I sealed in all of the sand, except again for the green stuff I'm going to use a mix of watered down Mod Podge, because so far yet I've never had that stuff dry with any kind of white filmy look. Once that's all down, we're going to seal it in with Mod Podge like I just mentioned, and we're going to use the flow improver again to allow that to have better capillary action to flow into all of the areas where you want the glue to actually do its job sealing. So I get the eyedropper and I'm going to stick it in. I think I just forgot to zap it with the flow improver. But okay, why not? Well, I'll show you this because you'll see the difference it makes. This is no flow improver. There's flow improver mixed in the actual glue, but I haven't given it that preliminary spray of flow improver. So I'm probably looking at this thinking, why is this such crap? And then I remember, geez, Davies, maybe flow improver. So when you put the flow improver on, I try to go straight down so it doesn't blast off any of the pieces of turf that aren't sealed well. And now look at it. See, now it's really going in nicely. And I didn't even have to spray that much of the flow improver on, but you can see how, it just absorbs into all of the turf around it so much better. So we'll do that one more time just so you can see it again. I'm going to go straight down on it as much as possible, and you see the turf hasn't really blown off it. And then here we go. And look how it runs into all of that coarse stuff too, even, which is nice. And so when it dries, the whole thing is, pretty plasticky, which I love. Because you don't want to go through all of this work and then only to have all of your stuff fall off, So I'm going to do, again, I'm going to go through and do all of these road sections in the exact same way. And here's the lot of them, all done with the stuff sealed in. And then there's only a couple more steps, and then this project is complete. Now I'm going to dusty these up just a little bit more, and I'm going to get some of the dusty stuff into the shoulders a little bit, and I'm going to do that with pigments or pastels here. And it's going to be a very quick, haphazard sort of procedure. I'm going to use these old artist's pastels that I've had forever. Just get a razor blade and chop some off here and here. And if it goes into the shoulders, that's fine. Often the vehicles moving down the roads will blow the dust right onto the plants and things, so they can be quite dusty. And again, I'm going to move this into the shoulders a bit, onto the plants, and also sort of imitate the directions that the wheels will be pulling this stuff. And it's quite subtle, but it really does, it's effective at giving it a dry, dusty sort of look. And I'll seal this in at the end with a coat of matte varnish. The acrylic paint, the latex base coat, has a bit of a sheen. You can't really see it on this, but I want to dull that right out as well. Now that that's all done, I'm going in with my airbrush and just sealing all that in with a bit of a matte coat. And I'm keeping the airbrush just on the center of the road, like the actual road section. I'm not going to really brush it down on the shoulders because they're really not going to get touched that much. So that pastel isn't going to come off. And of course I'm using my beloved AK Ultra Matte varnish. Another reason why I'm sticking to the center of the road too is just to save some of the varnish, because if you don't really need it on the shoulders, and you really don't, the dusty stuff will just stay trapped in all the flocking material. So you might as well save your varnish, stick to the middle of the road. And here they are done. So I stacked them up. I took some Flames of War pieces of foam and just cut them so that they fit in the road section, and that spaces it away from the turf. And so when I get the appropriate sized box, some kind of narrow thing, I can just jam the whole thing in there, and that should keep them nice and safe and keep all that stuff from coming off. And then here's the crossroads and the Y intersection. And that's how that goes. So here they are all completed. I'm a big fan of modular terrain over terrain boards because you can change the battlefield up. You're not stuck with the same sort of game area that you would be if you had these as solid tiles. And the other thing is these roads, I'm going to be using them for Italy and for Sicily and for Tunisia. So, you know, just by changing the surroundings and mix and matching all the different terrain components that you can have different theaters of war quite easily without having to have the space too to store all these big terrain boards. So yeah, I really love the modular terrain, and I'll very likely use these same roads for my 15 mil stuff as well, because they can just be a narrower dirt road. And I have narrow 15 millimeter roads that I can use for 12 millimeter if I want. But yeah, I really enjoy being able to switch the terrain up to have different sort of strategic challenges. What else can I say about this stuff? Oh yeah, if you are interested in the telephone poles, they're from a model railroad company called Alhagen. And so N scale works out perfect for doing 12 millimeter stuff. And for doing 15 millimeter stuff, you can use the TT scale. And they have a lot of useful stuff. So yeah, just check out N scale or TT scale doing a web search and see all the cool stuff you can get. And also I have a video on how I did the road sign, so if you want to see that, I'll just post the link up here. As always, thank you for watching. I hope that you gained something from this video to help your hobby time excellence, and we'll see you next time for the next round of Miniature Dork Universe. So enjoy your week, and Davey's out.